He speaks are your words, Lord, and that you give us ears to hear and hearts to act upon that. Amen.
Today's reading is taken from Proverbs, and it's Proverbs 8, and that can be found on page 641 if you have a church Bible. Proverbs 8. Wisdom's call. Does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights along the way, where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gates leading into the city, at the entrances, she cries aloud, "To you, O men, I call out, I raise my voice to all mankind. You who are simple, gain prudence. You who are foolish, gain understanding. Listen, for I have worthy things to say. I open my lips to speak what is right. My mouth speaks what is true, for my lips detest wickedness. All the words of my mouth are just. None of them is crooked or perverse. To the discerning, all of them are right. They are faultless to those who have knowledge. Choose my instructions instead of silver, knowledge rather than choose gold. For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence. I possess knowledge and discretion. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech. Counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have understanding and power. By me, kings reign and rulers make laws that are just. By me, princes govern and all nobles who rule on earth. I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. With me are riches and honor, enduring wealth and prosperity. My fruit is better than fine gold. What I yield surpasses choice silver. I walk in the way of righteousness along the paths of justice, bestowing wealth on those who love me and making their treasures full. The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works, before his deeds of old. I was appointed from eternity, from the beginning, before the world began. When there were no oceans, I was given birth, when there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills I was given birth, before he made the earth or its fields or any dust of the world. I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundary so that the waters could not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was the craftsman at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world and delighting in mankind. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Listen to my instruction and be wise. Do not ignore it. Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my doors, waiting at my doorway. For whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. But whoever fails to find me harms himself. All who hate me love death. Amen.
This morning, my plan is, doesn't always go to plan, but my plan is to talk about wisdom. That'll be no surprise after that reading. I'm going to talk about three things. Firstly, about the concept of wisdom as it's referred to in that passage in Proverbs. Then I'm going to look at some imagery in the Bible and how we can easily get the Bible to say some things that perhaps were not its original intention by misunderstanding imagery. And then I'm going to look at what we do with that exploration, that opportunity to look again at the Bible and the things that we learn if we're prepared to become vulnerable to learning, if I can put it like that. So let's first look at Proverbs. It's called a wisdom book, as in the whole of Proverbs. And that's a type of writing, not only found in the Bible, but found at the time that Proverbs was written. People wrote like that. Sages, they were called. And they tended to write truths in nuggets. I don't know whether anybody else has tried to read a massive chunk of Proverbs. Okay, Liz may feel that that was a tricky chunk, but that kind of flowed. But a lot of Proverbs, it's a saying, followed by another saying, followed by another saying. And if you try and read too many of them, it just blows your mind, because they're not necessarily related and they're not meant to be read in great long passages. They're meant to be read in little bite-sized chunks. So why did I ask Liz to read a whole chapter then? I can hear you asking. I like to think that Proverbs 8 is slightly different in that it has some instruction, if you like, at the beginning. Then it has this section that's pretty much a hymn or poetry in the middle, and then it has some more instruction. And in this passage, it talks about wisdom that's often referred to as woman wisdom. By that I don't mean that women have wisdom, although obviously they do, but that wisdom is a metaphorical personification of a divine attribute. Okay, that's a long sentence. I had to write it down to make sure I said it properly. But by that I mean that it's this characteristic, if you like, of God that becomes spoken about in the first person and is known as woman wisdom because it's, in the original language, a feminine noun. I'm going no further in describing that because Helen sat over there and she knows how appalling my understanding of the English language is. So I'm stopping, okay? Don't let me go any further. It's all going to go wrong. I felt brave saying that. So this concept or this person, woman wisdom, takes up the guise of one of these sages of the time and invites students to take up her course, to follow her learning. And excitingly for me, she seeks the unlearned and the simple. Yes, that means it's okay. And it can sound like a convoluted thing, but at the time, the way that teachers and sages went about getting students was that they would sit at the gates and they would start up conversations and they would get people to follow them, to study what they had to say and that kind of thing. This idea of studying wisdom becomes even more profound, I believe, when you look at another way of looking at woman wisdom as a description of Jesus written in the Proverbs. So when woman wisdom or Jesus invites students to study, to follow, and they're interested in the unlearned and the people who don't feel that they have a right to follow a teacher, then potentially we find ourselves being invited by Jesus to follow him, written in the Proverbs, before Jesus was born. And that leads us on to the poetry, if you like, in the middle section, where it talks about before creation, before the world began. And we're reminded that Jesus, although born on earth, as we all know the Christmas story, that wasn't the beginning of Jesus. Jesus was there before time began as part of the Trinity. And it's an exciting truth that we get to explore. And some of you may understand it, but I have to say, I can tickle around the edges of it. I can have a go at reading some stuff on it, and I can feel like I've given it all I've got. But do I understand it? That's a bit strong. So, if it's a bit strong to say I understand it, what am I doing here? It's a good question. I asked myself the same question. Part of me would like to run away anywhere apart from be up here, because I don't pretend to know stuff. But what I do bring, particularly out of this chapter in Proverbs, is this invitation that woman wisdom gives us to seek, study, explore. And the thing I would like to do today is to encourage us to seek, study, and explore the Bible. And one of the ways I want us to do that is to look at imagery. Jesus uses heaps of imagery in the Bible because we know the phrase, a picture paints 1,000 words. So we have a picture, and from that we're able to grasp a concept. I think a lot in pictures, so I like the fact that there's lots of pictures. Images are powerful and enduring. But we need to be careful how we unpack the pictures that we have in our head. We need to critically analyse. I don't mean be critical. I mean be willing to look at things and unpick them. And by things, here I'm talking about the Bible. Be willing to look at the Bible and unpick it. Rachel, who do you think you are saying stuff like that? I'm confident that the Bible holds endless truths. And we can hold on to a truth or the beginning of a truth and be afraid to let go of that in order to find any deeper truth behind it. So I encourage us to be willing to be vulnerable in our learning, to perhaps put down images that we have in our heads and go, is that really what I was meant to take from that? Is that really the learning point? I'm going to use a couple of examples. The first is from John 15, verse 5. It says, "You are the vine and I am the branches." Okay? Classic image from the Bible. I don't believe anybody here has not heard of that image before. When I say that, I wonder what picture pops up in your head. I don't need to know it, but I want you to think about the picture that pops up in your head. Well, it's funny you should say that, Carol, because I think that's the answer that a lot of people give. But here's the thing. A vine, unlike a tree, doesn't have a tree trunk. Oh, indeed. I didn't prime her. Okay, she just said it. Okay, so we've got a vine, which is a stump in the ground, no tree trunk, and then branches. So when Jesus says, "You're the vine, I'm the branches," etc., etc., "those abide in me and me in them." If there's no trunk, there isn't this big thing to lean on and depend on, and then the branches are there or not there, and it'll be fine. The tree will grow anyway. The branches are it, above ground. If we're the branches, we're it above ground. It's a slightly different concept. And perhaps changes the relationship that we have in terms of, if there's a tree trunk, there's a bit more choice about whether we're a branch or not, knowing the tree trunk will still be there. If there's no trunk and the branches are it, then it means that we have more responsibility. If we transfer that for a moment to the concept of church, if we imagine that church is there like a tree trunk, and we can join in or not, church will carry on. If we look at it as just the branches, there is no thing that will keep carrying on. We are it. So we have more responsibility. I find that an uncomfortable truth. And I am not saying that my picture that I have got is better than your picture that you've got, because I don't know what your picture is. And I suspect that if I sat down with a group of people and had a long conversation, that lots of things would come out of that discussion. And that's my point. I want to encourage us to be prepared to put down our image and listen to somebody else's interpretation, somebody else's image, and go, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that," or, "Oh, I don't think that sounds quite right." To critically analyse, to seek, to study, to explore. If we hold on to things tightly through fear, we lose the ability to learn new things, because we spend all our energy holding on to the things that we think we already know, or perhaps hope we know and are frightened that we might not know. I'm going to use another example. In the Bible, there's lots of talk about sheep. Lots and lots of talk about sheep. Chris was telling me that when some friends came over from Cayman, they were very, very keen to see sheep. I see sheep most days of my life, so I was like, okay, whatever. But they hadn't seen a sheep, and so much of the Bible talks about sheep that this seemed like a really important thing for them to be able to see a sheep. And they were really excited when they saw a sheep. So I wonder what things we collectively, or me, you as individuals, have never seen, that we've made up some grand picture that we need to check out. I bet there's loads of terms in the Bible that I've created an image that's nothing like what it actually means. So we can learn from each other. And in this passage in Proverbs, we're encouraged to learn from each other. Not just those people who have a lot of knowledge, or those people who have a lot of intelligence, or those people who are rated in academia. They have things to share, and it's important to learn. But wisdom is given by God. And he gives all sorts of people all sorts of wisdom. He talks about the master worker having wisdom in Proverbs 8, verse 30. In Exodus, craftsmen were called wise men because they understood their craft. They understood how to handle the materials that they were asked to handle. That's wisdom. I think sometimes we have a potential to narrow wisdom or our concepts of wisdom. I'm going to read a little bit here from a book by Philip Keller, who was a shepherd. And he has much to teach us about sheep. So I'm going to skip through a couple of pages, so bear with me while I find each little bit. In Psalm 42, verse 11, David cries out, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted within me? Hope thou in God." This book was written a while ago, so it's an old language that he's using. Now there's an exact parable to this in the caring for sheep. Only those immediately acquainted with sheep and their habits understand the significance of a cast sheep or a cast down sheep. This is an old English shepherd's term for a sheep that's turned over on its back and cannot get up again by itself. A cast sheep is a very pathetic sight. Lying on its back, its feet in the air, it flails away frantically, struggling to stand up without success. Sometimes it will bleat a little for help, but generally it lies there, lashing about, frightened and frustrated. The way it happens is this. A big sheep or a long fleece sheep will lie down comfortably in some little hollow or depression in the ground. It may roll on its side, just slightly, stretch out, enjoy the sunshine. Suddenly the centre of gravity in the body shifts as it stretches. So it turns on its back far enough that its feet no longer touch the ground. It may feel a sense of panic and start to paw frantically. Frequently, this only makes things worse. It rolls over even further. Now it's quite impossible for it to regain its feet. As it lies there struggling, gases begin to build up in the rumen. And these expand, and they tend to retard and cut off blood circulation to the extremities of the body, especially the legs. During my years as keeper of sheep, perhaps some of the most poignant memories are wrapped around the anxiety of keeping count of my flock and repeatedly saving and restoring cast sheep. Again and again I would spend hours searching for a single sheep that was missing. Then, more often than not, I would see it at a distance, down on its back, lying helpless. At once I would start to run towards it, hurrying as fast as I could, for every minute was critical. Within me, there was a mingling sense of fear and joy. Fear it might be too late, joy it was found at all. As soon as I reached the cast ewe, my very first impulse was to pick it up. Tenderly, I would roll the sheep over on its side. This would relieve the pressure of gases in the rumen. If she'd been down for long, I would have to lift her up onto her feet. Then, straddling the sheep with my legs, I would hold her erect, rubbing her limbs to restore the circulation to her legs. This often took quite a little time. When the sheep started to walk again, she often just stumbled, staggered, and collapsed in a heap once more. All the time I worked on the cast sheep, I would talk to it gently. When are you going to learn to stand on your own feet? I'm so glad I found you in time, you rascal. And so the conversation would go. Always couched in a language that combined tenderness and rebuke, compassion and correction. Little by little, the sheep would regain its equilibrium. It would start to walk steadily and surely. By and by, it would dash away to rejoin the others, set free from its fears and frustrations, given another chance to live a little longer. Philip Keller, as a shepherd, has some insights to a phrase that we read that we could easily interpret as something else. If I didn't know better, I might think a downcast sheep was one that was stood in the rain with its ears hung down and feeling very sorry for itself. But here we learn that a downcast sheep has got itself into a position but can't get itself back up. It needs help. So that, to me, creates a different image. And when I read it, I feel a different sense of responsibility. If I was to think of that sheep as me, or a friend, or somebody I know, or somebody I've once met, instead of thinking, well, the sun will come out, their ears will pick up, they'll be fine, there's a sense of responsibility. If somebody's cast down, possibly a shoulder in the side, helping them roll over, staying with them while they find their feet, turns one image of, oh, poor thing, hopefully they'll pull themselves together and it will all be all right, to a, here's a situation where potentially I make a difference and potentially I have a role. Those are just two images. And as I said before, I'm not saying that I or anybody else has got the answer of what that image means for eternity. But I am saying that by seeking, by studying, exploring, sharing wisdom, seeking other people's wisdom, potentially we have much to learn. And learning is not for learning's sake. What does learning do if we just learn? We need to apply it. Not only do we need to be willing to explore and to unpack, we need to be willing to take on new concepts or recognise the concepts that we've already taken on. We need to do that as individuals. We also need to do that collectively. Because the whole point is that no one person has, not even all the knowledge, has a whole chunk of knowledge, but collectively we have some knowledge. Yesterday we had a resources morning here and we were doing all sorts of jobs. And I had, anybody that's on the resources team knows that this is not unusual, a very long list. And I was really excited that different people that came along could take different jobs on that list because that was their skill set. And it really delights me when people are able to do the thing that their wisdom blossoms out of them with. And again, we narrow wisdom to being, this narrow concept. Wisdom is a deep, deep truth. And as we look at the Bible, we realise that this is full of deep, deep truth. And it is way too easy to be glib. It's way too easy to imagine that we know the stories because we've heard them before. So I'm going to finish in a moment, but I just want you to think about, if you were to ask a 3-year-old how to drive a car, okay, I can imagine one response might be, you go like this, and that's how you drive a car, okay? If you actually get in a car and go, we all know you're not going to get very far. I understand why a 3-year-old would say that, because it's kind of makes sense. Roughly, you get what they mean. There's a steering wheel, the brr is probably the engine noise, etc., etc. But is that enough truth to really get a handle on how to drive a car? Probably not. Well, kind of hope you agree with me. So there are deeper truths. But if we always hold on to that image of that's how you drive a car, we prevent ourselves from learning the deeper truths and gaining wisdom that allows us to actually go from A to B and possibly give somebody else a lift from A to B. So we have a responsibility, I believe, to explore the Bible, to seek and to search, and then to apply what we learn, but not hold on to it so tightly that we're never prepared to go back and look at the same thing again and check our learning, relearn, and continue to explore. And as we explore, we don't do it on our own. The Holy Spirit is with us as we explore, and he reveals bits to us that on our own, let's be frank, we would never get. So I'm going to close now, but I just encourage us to seek, search, explore, and apply the wisdom that we find in the Bible.